Welcome to the introduction video of the new Maxx-Remote software. In this video, I will present the software and its functions and show you how to use them. The main goal behind Maxx-Remote is to enable you to control multiple channels of one or more Innosonix power amps simultaneously via individual and customizable groups, no matter how many power amps your installation contains. You can either prepare the settings of an installation off-site and have the software automatically transmit those settings once connected to the network shared by all your devices, or, when on-site, you can copy all settings of an existing installation into the software. On the left, you'll find the navigation bar. Clicking on either button will open up its respective tab. In the Device tab, clicking on the Add Device button will open an additional window where you can choose to either create a blank project device with its individual hostname or, using the browser at the bottom of the window, add devices found in the network you are connected to as project devices. A project device serves as a virtual representation of an Innosonix power amp inside the software. Adding a device from the network will also instantly import all necessary information for that device used by Maxx-Remote later on. Please note that Maxx-Remote will not allow you to set the same hostname for more than one device. On the top right, you will find a switch labeled Generate Project Channels. When this switch is activated, the software will automatically create an appropriate number of project channels for and link them to that individual device. If that switch is activated while adding a device from the network, the settings from each channel of the power amp will be imported to their corresponding project channels. If you wish to create a device without a set of project channels, you can still create and link them with that device later on. Clicking on the Link button of one project device will open an additional window where you can create and rename project channels on the right side and link them to one of your device's channels each on the left side. Note that only project channels are displayed that are not yet linked to any project device. If you wish to link an already existing project device to one of the power amps inside of your network, click on the name of the project device you wish to link and change it to the hostname of the power amp you wish to link it to. Maxx-Remote will instantly try to establish a connection to the hostname you've just set, labeling the device's status as connecting. Once the connection process is finished, the device's status will change to online. Whenever Maxx-Remote is connecting a project device to a power amp in your network, and that project device has channels linked to it, the software will compare the settings for all linked channels with the settings of the corresponding power amp channels. In case any parameters do not match up, the device's status will change to out of sync and a pop-up will appear. In this pop-up, you can review the differences between the Maxx-Remote software and the real-world power amp and resync the power amp with Maxx-Remote either for the entire device or individual channels. Please note that parameters that are out of sync will enter a locked state in Maxx-Remote. You can change those parameters, but they won't be transmitted to their linked power amp channels until the out of sync state has been resolved via the out of sync pop-up window. When a device enters the online state, Maxx-Remote will repeat this data comparison for each device every 10 minutes. Each device labeled as online in your project device list and each device in the network browser of the Add Device window offers an Identify function, a little button with an eye icon on it. Hitting that button will cause the display of the corresponding power amp to start flashing, so it's easier for you to identify that particular power amp inside a rack with multiple power amps, for instance. Note that Maxx-Remote will only activate the Identify function for one single device at a time. So, for instance, if you hit the Identify for device 2 while device 1 is still going, the Identify function for device 1 will be deactivated first. Last but not least, the button labeled with the globe icon will open up the new control interface of the power amp that individual project device is connected to. Here you can directly check and change the settings of your power amp. For an in-depth view of the new control page, find a link to our introduction video in the description below. Let's move on to the Creator tab. Here you can create project channels and groups, assign channels to groups, and set the parameters a group can change for its assigned channels. The left side lists project channels, the right side your groups. Each side has its own Create button. Hitting that button will open a pop-up where you can decide how many elements to add and optionally set names for each new element. Every element with no specific name will receive a default name with an incrementing index. Just like with devices, simply click on the name of a group or channel to change it. Furthermore, tags are assigned to both groups and channels, which serve as search parameters when filtering a list of groups or channels for certain values. In order to add new or remove existing tags for one group or channel, open the tag editor by clicking on its Edit Tag button. Please note that Maxx-Remote also automatically sets and changes tags. For instance, when assigning a channel to a group, the group will receive the channel's name as a tag and vice versa. Changing the name of one of those linked objects will also update the corresponding tag to the new value. The same goes for project channels and devices. Linking a channel to a device will add the device's name as a tag to the channel and the channel's name as a tag to the device. You can assign groups and channels either by drag and drop or by selecting one or more groups and channels using the Ctrl and Shift keys and hitting the Map button. The Map button will only appear after at least one channel and one group are selected. You can assign one channel to multiple groups, multiple channels to one single group, or multiple channels to multiple groups all at once. Clicking on the gear icon of a group will open a window in which you can set which parameters a group will be able to change. For example, if you want to use a group as a group or master mute switch, it might make sense to deactivate all other parameters for this group to minimize the risk of unintentionally changing settings in the wrong channels. Next, let's have a look at the Group and Channel Overview tabs. The basic layout and functionality for both tabs is the same. The status of trivial parameters like mute, phase, volume, etc. for each channel and group is displayed in a table structure. More complex functions like equalizer and limiter can be changed in a separate window, which will appear by simply clicking on the respective buttons. Both overviews offer a search bar where you can enter keywords by which to filter the channel or group list. After typing a few characters, suggestions for possible search values that contain what you have typed so far will appear. The differences between Group and Channel Overview are that the Group Overview has no level meters and no input patch editor, and group parameters that have been deactivated in the Creator tab will be displayed as not available. Similarly, channels that are linked to power amps with no DSP option will display the EQ and limiter sections as not available as well. For an in-depth look at our equalizer, please have a look at the introduction video to the new Maxx device control page. Also, in both the channel and group overview, you'll find a little checkbox for each entry on the very left, so you can select multiple entries for editing. The checkbox in the header will deselect all currently selected channels or group entries, or, in case no other element is selected yet, select all visible groups or channels. When having selected multiple entries, you can then set trivial parameters for all these entries with the respective buttons in the header. Clicking on one parameter will open a pop-up where you can inspect the current values of all selected entries for that parameter and set the value that all selected entries shall receive for that parameter. In the group overview, you can simply change trivial parameters by clicking on them in the table view. As mentioned earlier, clicking on the EQ or limiter button will open a window where you can change the equalizer or limiter settings. In the channel overview, clicking either value will open a window displaying all the channel's parameters. A channel that is linked to a project device, which in turn is successfully connected to a power amp in your network, will receive the constraints for every parameter from that power amp. Maxx-Remote will then instantly warn you whenever you try to set values for any parameter that lie beyond its constraints. For channels, we also need to differentiate between its own values and its resulting output values, which are generated by combining the channel's own values and the values of all groups it is assigned to. In turn, this value will be sent to the power amp channel it is linked to. The tab for each value in the detailed channel view will display both the channel's own value and the values from all the groups it is assigned to, so you can personally review how the resulting output value is generated if necessary. Note that the value constraints mentioned earlier also apply to these output values. However, since these are not instantly available but have to be calculated first, you will receive a warning message if the constraints for an output value are not met. Now, let's have a look at how the output values for each parameter are generated. For power and mute, it is simple. Once at least one of all the combined channel and group mute values is set to mute, or power values is set to off, the corresponding output value will be the same. A channel's output phase will be inverted for every phase invert received from a group or its own channel value. So, 2 phase inverts will result in a normal phase, 3 phase inverts in a flipped phase. In case a channel's power, mute or phase output value differs from its own channel value, the corresponding button in the overview receives a subtle flash animation. The output volume and delay are generated by simply adding all channel and group values. Note that a channel's own delay value must always be positive. A group's delay value, on the other hand, can be set negative. If the resulting output value for any channel would be negative, however, you will receive a warning. For EQs and limiters, we need to have a closer look. Basically, the output EQ for a channel is generated, again, by combining all channel and group EQ settings. In the EQ tab, all the EQ bands from group equalizers the channel is assigned to will be listed but cannot be edited. The EQ plot will be generated not only from a channel's own equalizers, but also its group equalizers. Note that a power amp channel only has a limited capacity of how many EQ bands it can calculate. Thus, it is theoretically possible to assign more EQ bands to a channel than it is technically able to handle. When generating the output EQ, a channel's own values will always have priority over the group values. The number of used and available EQ bands for a channel is displayed at the top right of the EQ tab in the detailed channel view. Note that some high or low pass filters require more than one EQ band in order to be processed. If a channel is assigned more EQ bands than it can process, you will receive a warning and the omitted group EQ bands will be displayed in red in the EQ list. Just like with EQs, a channel's own limiter settings will take priority over group settings. The difference being that each of the available limiters can only have one set of values. So once a limiter receives a set of values either from its own channel or a group, the values of all other groups for that limiter will be ignored. If a channel's own limiter is deactivated, it will be set with the first activated group limiter in line. Maxx-Remote will work through the group values in the same order in which they are listed in the Group Overview and Creator tab. Each of the 3 limiters is treated independently, so a channel can have its own current limiter setting and still receive the settings for voltage limiters 1 and 2 from different groups each. Let's have a look at the View tab. We created the View editor so you will be able to create individual control surfaces tailored to your personal preferences and needs. You can add background images to a view, add links to individual groups, channels and devices, quick controls to change a channel's or group's power and mute settings. You can add level meters for specific channels and create links between different views, for example, from a floor plan to individual rooms. In the future, we plan to implement a way for you to access these views from an external control interface, like a tablet. That way, it would be possible to create an individual and simple end-user control surface, for example, for individual rooms or an installation as a whole. But that's just one example for how this feature can be used in the future. Last but not least, let's have a look at the Projects tab. In the Projects tab, you can create new, save your current, and load existing projects. You can import external projects and export projects to your machine. You can connect to other Maxx-Remote instances in the network with your machine and set whether your project shall be visible to other Maxx-Remote instances. Additionally, you can activate whether to automatically save your currently active project before creating a new or connecting to a remote project. In case other users are remotely connected to your Maxx-Remote instance, they will be listed in the Projects tab. If so desired, you can disconnect individual clients connected to your machine. Once a connection to a remote project is established, all data and commands will be synchronized between the server and all clients. Since a client will also synchronize its local data storage with the server in the background, all project data will remain even after disconnecting or being disconnected from the server. When connected to a remote project, the import function will send a project from your machine's storage into the remote server storage. Likewise, the export function will store a project from the server's local storage in your machine. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.